Hello, I'm Jim Falk. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now, most observers agree that our immigration system is broken and badly in need of reform, something which, imagine this, has not occurred in over 3 decades. The discord surrounding this issue is not limited, however, to the United States, as migration ranks high as a hot-button issue in Europe, where political parties have effectively used it to win support. Now, you just might ask, what motivates a migrant to risk his or her life or that of their families to leave their country for an unknown destination? Also, as opposition grows to both legal and undocumented migration, what options do government have to address this issue? So let's hear what our 2 experts have to say about what is an extremely complex topic. Dr. Jim Hollifield is the Nixon Arnold Professor of International and Political Economy and Director of the John Goodwin Tower Center for Political Studies at Southern Methodist University. He's the author of numerous books and articles on migration and has served as an advisor to several governments and international organizations ranging from the World Bank to even the United Nations. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is the Cato Institute's Associate Director of Immigration Studies, David Bier. He was recently on our other program on migration. He's the author of the recent Cato report, U.S. Immigration Policy Lags Behind a Globalizing World. Welcome to both of you. Great to have you with us. So before we start the program, I thought it would be interesting for us to look at a short clip. I was over at the University of Texas at Dallas just a few weeks ago where they have an exhibition called La Frontera, the Frontier, and I spoke with a man, Dr. Jose Zelaya, who immigrated to the United States at the age of 13 from Honduras, and we were touring the exhibition, and I want you all to hear what he thought about this painting that we were looking at.
Well, we see culture, we see ancestral knowledge, we see what we don't really see, which is a community going through a journey that many don't wish to have taken. But because of the desperation, because of the natural disasters, because of the worsened conditions, because of the push factors like rampant violence or just absolute levels of poverty, families have to leave their very beautiful native countries to be able to seek new opportunities. So what I see is pain, but I also see hope for the future.
Now, Jim, that's just one story, but give us a sense, give our audience a sense of just how many people now are, really under this sort of umbrella of global migration.
Yeah. Well, if we go by the UN numbers, and I think your audience should understand that an international migrant is someone who has left their country of birth. They've been outside of their country of birth for a year or more. And according to the UN numbers, we're looking at close to almost 300 million people who live outside of the country in which they were born. Now that sounds like a lot of people, but it's barely 3.5% of the global population. And if you look at those numbers, we got to boil it down to those who have left their country because they couldn't stay there.
And you call that forced migration. And we have a graph here that shows that.
Yeah, this is forced migration. And the UN counts people of concern who have had to leave where they were living for one reason or another. And that's about 110 million people today, so about 1% of the global population. And it's also important to note of those people of concern, refugees are actually only about 25 million. Asylum seekers are around 5 million of those numbers. And over half of those people are people who are displaced for one reason or another, who've been forced to move. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to survive.
So when you think about what's happened in the last few years, Ukraine must be an example.
Yeah.
Yemen, Syria.
Yeah. Well, until the Ukrainian crisis and the Venezuelan movement, about 86% of the people of concern were somewhere in the global south. So most of those people had not been able to move towards the global north. So the overwhelming numbers, they're trapped in areas that are conflict areas, areas where climate change is forcing people to move in the global south, in Africa, the Middle East, also in Latin America, Central America in particular. I would say that today we're looking at a humanitarian crisis, the likes of which we have not seen for in our lifetime.
David, how do you see this?
Well, look, if you look at the U.S. population growth over time, we're at the lowest rates in our entire history, right? Down over 90% from its highs. And the consequence of that is we have a lot of older people who are in their retirement years, drawing on Social Security in most cases. And that population difference ultimately means that there are fewer workers supporting more retirees, which increases inflation and also means that there aren't enough people paying into the system. So the Social Security Administration estimates that by about 2034, you're going to have a 30 million person or worker shortage that they need to keep revenues equal to expenses. And because of that shortage, they'll have to massively either increase taxes or cut benefits to Social Security. So absolutely, we need workers. It's unfortunate the reasons why so many people are on the move. That's not a positive thing. I look at the decline in liberty around the world as really a disastrous thing for the world. But there is an opportunity for the United States to take that negative and turn it into a positive thing for the country.
David, you've done some interesting work at Cato looking at how what's happened as far as freedom and economic freedom have affected migration. Take us a little bit into that study.
Yeah, so since 2007, about 90% of the world's population has seen a decline in freedom as measured by the Cato Institute, Fraser and Center's analysis of the measure of human liberty. And, this measures all freedom of speech, freedom of association, all freedom of trade, all of these different measures of human liberty have been on the decline. And if you look at where migrants are moving, the majority of them have moved from a country with less freedom into a country that's more freedom. And sometimes it's a sort of a marginal shift. But sometimes, the marginal shift can be huge, so for people moving out of Syria into Turkey, Turkey isn't the freest country in the world, but it's a lot better than living under the despotism that we saw under Assad. So that is a big motivating factor for a lot of the migration we have seen. People want to get out of disastrous situations run by tyrannical governments around the world.
Jim, talk about these trends.
Well, I think in the United States now we're getting a taste of what the Europeans have been dealing with for decades. Because don't forget, Europe, the Mediterranean, you're next to the great crescent of instability, that runs from West Africa all the way over to South Asia. And of course, Europe has a lot of imperial colonial ties with these countries that are in conflict. So it's a natural place for people in those areas to flee to Europe. And the Europeans have really struggled to get a handle on this. So if you look at Germany in 2015-16, the Germans took proportionately about the same number of asylum seekers that we're seeing in the United States today. So you're right. Now people are coming from all over the globe, but still the majority of people who are coming to our southern border are coming from the Western Hemisphere. They're coming increasingly from Venezuela. They're still coming from Cuba. They're coming from Haiti. They're coming from Nicaragua and other places in the Western Hemisphere. But since it's so hard to get into Europe, people, even Ukrainians, for example, are finding their way to the southern border of the United States. So people from Africa and people from South Asia and even from China.
A lot of these people are borrowing against their future earnings. So people are lending them money so they can come to the United States and make a lot more money than they could in their home country. and then they get repaid. Whoever lent them the money is repaid through the wages in the United States. And the only reason that whole system works is because there are jobs and opportunities here. Unfortunately, we sort of short-circuited this process in a way by when we arrest people at the border and then we release them, we don't release them with work authorization. And so there's a huge number of people who don't really know how to um, navigate the underground economy. Mexicans for years had lots of people to guide them through that process. How do you find a job when you don't have work authorization? But for these Venezuelans who are showing up, some other people from around the world, they listen to the Border Patrol and they say, look, you have to apply for asylum. You have to wait 180 days after you apply for asylum to get work authorization. And that is a long time. So you might be 6 months to apply for asylum, 6 months to get the work authorization. That's a full year in which you can't produce or contribute anything to the U.S. economy. And that's why you're seeing so many people showing up in shelters. They don't have anywhere to live. I mean, it's a huge problem for sure, but it's one that we're kind of choosing as policymakers because we want to deter migration rather than channel it into productive uses for the country.
Yeah, and clearly that doesn't seem like it's the best thing for our economy.
Yeah, David is right. We haven't created a system for bringing people here to work. We have very, very limited numbers of visas for people who want to come here and work. So the result is a lot of people are coming through the asylum system, which is not the right way to do it. And if we follow the Canadian or the Australian example, we would have a lot more visas available for people to come here through legal pathways and get into the workforce without having to go through this elaborate process of seeking asylum. So the Canadians, as you know, have a point system. Over half of the people
How does that work?
Well, most of the people they're letting in for employment purposes. So you get a lot of points based on the needs of the Canadian labor market and also the skills that you're bringing to the table when you want to migrate to Canada. You do get some points if you have family members in Canada. Obviously, the Canadians also take a lot of people who are seeking asylum and will become refugees. So the Canadians have a much, much more sophisticated system than we do. And by the way, the Canadian immigration policy is very popular in Canada. It works.
When you say popular, it's accepted
It's accepted by the Canadian people. They understand how important immigration is for the national development of Canada. So by forcing so many people to go into the underground economy in this country, we have made immigration very unpopular in some segments of our society. So we need to reform our immigration system. We need to gear it more to the needs of the market and to employment.
How do you move to a discussion of a more rational reform of immigration?
Well, I think we're in a moment right now where there are, the one party thinks the other party is all to blame. And it took many decades, as you might recall. I mean, the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, very high levels of illegal immigration for decades, administration after administration. It didn't matter. Right now, we're in a moment where certainly the Republican Party believes this is just a transient phenomenon that's caused by one president. And if this president goes away, then the whole problem goes away. I think that's really naive. It doesn't take into account the long history of illegal immigration, the fact that these trails are now blazed. I mean, the Darien Gap, it used to take 2 weeks. It used to be incredibly difficult to get up from Colombia into Panama through the jungle. Now it takes less than 2 days. People have guides. People have blazed this trail. And once the trails are blazed, people are going to follow it because the economic opportunity is still here. We're still the greatest country in the world when it comes to economic opportunity, particularly for the lower skill people who just want to get a foot into the labor market. We are the best in the world at that. And so I don't see an end in sight necessarily, So once that becomes clear to both parties, that's when you're going to get, okay, we need to actually sit down and figure this out.
Jim, few people know as much about European politics as you do. And just like in the United States, where immigration has become such a polarizing issue, it's the same thing in Europe now. I mean, do European voters rank this as number one?
It's pretty high up there, and we can see, a surge in the radical right, populist right in Europe, and immigration has been a number one issue. Those who voted for Britain to leave the European Union, they did it basically on the campaign of taking back control of the country.
There was something about a plumber, right, taking the job?
Well, there's the famous Polish plumber,
right.
Very handsome guy. Many of the housewives around Europe said, I want a plumber like him to come and fix my plumbing. The problem is, of course, you don't have enough plumbers. And with the European labor market, which was functioning pretty smoothly, allowing European workers to move around, this was really boosting the economy and the labor markets in many countries. But in Britain, there was a strong reaction against this. The irony is that the British left the European Union, and as a result, they cut themselves off from all the labor they had coming from Eastern Europe. And now you have very high numbers of people coming from other parts of the world. So the British employers have had to substitute workers coming from other parts of the globe. In the past year, there were 700,000 immigrants into Britain.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the UK, because something that I found really amazing is this whole concept that they have in the UK right now of subsidizing the small African country of Rwanda, to send migrants there. I mean, that seems like the most egregious human rights violation that I can imagine.
Well, again, one of the ironies of Britain leaving the European Union was that now they don't have the cooperation with the countries of the EU to control migration, to send migrants back. So the British government came up with this harebrained idea of sending the asylum seekers to Rwanda. And the Rwandan government has been paid something like £250 million. They have yet to take a single asylum seeker. This is bogged down in the courts in Britain and in Europe. So it's been something of a fiasco, I would say, for the British government. But the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, seems determined to push this through. One thing that's very important to keep in mind, Jim, is that there's always an enormous element of symbolic politics in immigration politics. And just the idea that somehow Britain can outsource this problem, send people to Rwanda, that has become sort of in the popular imagination. It's going to be a way of getting rid of the people that they don't want coming across the channel. And it has been totally ineffective.
But the EU has been doing also providing funding, like to Tunisia, the North African country, providing I think close to £1 billion to encourage Tunisians not to let people from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, as well as North Africa, to get to Europe.
Well, I mean, in order to get a handle on especially on forced migration and the numbers that we're looking at, you've got to have the cooperation of your neighbors. So without that kind of cooperation, it's just going to be a chaotic mess. And Turkey, as you know, played a key role in helping to stop the flows out of Syria and the Middle East. Tunisia today, Libya, the countries of North Africa, Morocco, they have all been cooperating with the European Union for, if you want, externalizing border control. And, we're in the same situation right now with Mexico. I mean, we cannot get a handle on this migration without very close cooperation with Mexico.
David, do you think anything will change with Mexico with upcoming elections on June 2nd? Or will it be same old?
Look, we've seen ruthless crackdowns in Mexico for the last decade, starting in 2014, multiple times in 2018, 2019, 2021, 2022. So the idea that this Mexico is going to solve our problems for us, I think at this point should be clear that that's not going to happen. Yes, every time they send in the National Guard and kick people off of trains, and they start going on buses, they fly planes. There's a million ways to adapt, and the underground economy is quite nimble and it's quite sophisticated. And so the idea that we're just going to give them some money and then they're going to solve the problem. Of course, if they did solve the problem, we wouldn't give them any more money. So there's a little bit of a perverse incentive structure. The end of the story, January was a low month in part because of yet another crackdown in Mexico. But we're already seeing the numbers start to pick up again. And I fully expect by the spring we'll be back near where we were before. And so it's whack-a-mole. You hit one thing, it shows up somewhere else. And at the end of the day, we need a new strategy for handling immigration to the United States.
And the bottom line is that people are trying to find a more security, a better life. I was in Tunisia last summer, and I met the Secretary General of an organization called the Tunisian Organization of Family and Education. And I asked him, why are so many people leaving? And let's listen to what he had to say.
My point about this is that it's not only about economic growth, it's also about upward social mobility. And this is the missing element of the whole picture. Even in cases when there were plans or strategies or projects to develop economic growth in certain areas, we didn't see enough focus on upward social mobility. And this has led basically to young people receiving a modest income of, several hundreds or, 1,000 dinars or whatever, but they didn't see how their quality of life is going to improve over time. And therefore, there is this perception that in the West, if you go, you start your life, etc., you become, you grow, etc. So people are still attracted by this idea of how in the West you can see how your social mobility, or you can have a plan, for upward social mobility. And this is a missing element in Tunisia, I guess in the region as well. I don't think in Syria, in Lebanon, other places.
We have just a little bit of time left, and remittances are really a key component of this. And when you look at countries that can quickly become unstable, it's because, for a variety of reasons, remittances are cut off. For instance, let's take what's happened in Gaza and the West Bank. People from the West Bank who were working in Israel, they were able to send remittances back to their Palestinian families. Same thing with some of the issues with Syria and Libya. How do you see this, Jim? Because it really is, in a sense, remittances are a form of foreign assistance.
Yeah, well, to go back to what David was saying earlier, clearly global markets have developed for migration. Remittances are part of those global markets. And it ends up being a win-win, if you will, for the migrants, for their families, for the countries that have sent migrants abroad. I always like to look at the Philippines, for example, which is one of the great countries sending migrants all over the world, getting lots of remittances and money coming back. This happens in India as well. It happens in Mexico and Central America. And I would just point out that remittances are actually among the largest capital flows, the largest sources of foreign exchange in many of these countries, greater than official development assistance, greater than foreign direct investment.
David, I know that you testify often on the Hill. When you are preparing your testimony and talking to staff, do you feel that they understand these issues, and when their bosses get before the TV cameras, they just sort of ignore what they really know? Or is there just a basis lack of understanding of some of these issues about the benefits of migration?
I think it's a more difficult conversation to get to the benefits part of it. Everybody knows there are problems. Everybody can see the illegal immigration coming across the Rio Grande.
Yeah.
That's so visible. Border Patrol's coming and they're saying, we need this many more billion. What are you going to do about it? And when you're in that kind of mode, you're not thinking about well, all these economic benefits. Women are going to be able to enter the labor force because there's going to be more child care, or the fact that we need elder care in this country. You got all these retirees leaving the labor force because their spouse is disabled and they have to be home to take care of them, and they're on Medicare and Social Security rather than paying into the system. So you don't get to have those conversations when the border is chaotic and you have all of these very visual images. And so I think it's a chicken or egg scenario. You have to fix the border in order to fix the system, but you got to fix the system in order to fix the border. And so with that kind of catch-22, you're stuck in what we've seen for the last 4 decades. And so I really think that we're close on some of these members of Congress, getting them to understand the bigger picture. But when you're sort of stuck in the micro, we're going to give this many more billion to Border Patrol.
Yeah, and let me be cynical.
The big conversation.
Let me be cynical and say it's awfully hard to raise money for your campaign if you take that sort of realistic approach. We have barely scratched the surface today, and I want to encourage our audience to go to both Cato, your website, where you can see a lot of the good work that you're doing with your colleagues. Dr. Hollifield, you just recently wrote a piece for the Wilson Center, A Realist Approach to Forced Migration and Human Displacement. So I encourage people to go to that website for the Wilson Center to look at it. And thank you both. Really enlightening conversation today. And as we've heard, the number of migrants, either because they're being forcefully displaced or seek a more prosperous, secure life, that number is going to continue to grow. And obviously, it's going to sadly create political and cultural pressure points. But due to the overall, I guess the question is, do the overall benefits of immigration outweigh the negatives for immigrants and the countries they attempt to migrate to? So we've just heard there are lots of challenges as well as some opportunities, and I might even say needs. You can be sure that we're going to continue this conversation another time, and I want to thank all of you for spending part of your day with us, where we continue talking about things that matter with people who care.